Morning everyone, thanks for being on time. Some of the participants are still making their way in, so let's give them another few minutes and I'll be right back to kick off the webinar. Thank you. Alright, thanks for waiting. Good morning everyone and welcome to our webinar. I hope you are as excited as I am, and let us dive into today's important topic, which is powering your organization's sustainability practices through data and AI. I'm your host for today, Macy. So let me give you a quick rundown of what to expect for the next hour. As we are well aware, it is clear that sustainability has transitioned beyond just a buzzword. Organizations across the globe are consistently seeking avenues to optimize their sustainability practices. It is important to maintain compliance with prevailing and potential legal sustainability benchmarks. But not only that, it is also about strategically positioning themselves ahead of the market curve to attain and sustain competitive advantage. For those already leveraging the power of data and AI in their sustainability practices, and even for those taking their first steps into this realm, it is important to understand how can data and AI truly optimize your sustainability management efficiency and performance before taking those decisive steps forward. So let me introduce our main speaker today, and we can dive into the presentation sharing in a short while. Today, we have Mr. Q Yokling, the Executive Director of KewMann's, and he has more than 20 years experience working with a large organization, which includes the financial institution and the government, to provide innovative solutions. He also assisted customers with transformation needs from big data analytics to AI and behavioral science. So some of the customers are Mastercard Asia Pacific and NTUC Income. So without further ado, let me pass the floor to Yokling. Over to you, Yokling.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Macy. And now let me share my slides. I believe everyone can see the slides right now. Right. Okay, let me get started. The topic is about data and AI, but I think before we go deeper into AI and data in the aspect of sustainability, let's define what is sustainability, right? That will cause a bit of confusion for different people. Number one is that sustainability versus ESG, right? So sustainability has a bigger scheme of things than ESG because sustainability is also to non-for-profit organizations like public sector or government agencies, as well as individuals as well, right? And therefore, from sustainability standpoint, there's one more additional E. I call it as economic, right? So, for example, if you are a public sector delivering traffic services to your citizen, that is your economy, right? And if you are a trading companies trading goods in and out from the countries, and that's basically your economic, right? And that's your company goals. And on top of that, to ensure that your organizations or even individuals are sustainable, therefore we need to adopt the concept of E, S, and G, namely environmental, social, and governance. Again, back to the definition of sustainability. Always when I speak about this topic with our customers and prospect, that generally relates this to only the E, and more specifically the carbon emission. Yes, it is a very important thing, and it's about net zero and other important aspect in carbon emission reduction. However, E or environmental has more than carbon emission. For example, it's also deal with water. It's also deal with waste, right? So those are the additional aspect on environmental that as an organizations you need to take care of. And the social aspect, which is the S, and also the governance aspect, which is the G, is often been downplayed, but it's actually an important aspect from an ESG perspective. That will include from a social, for example, how do you engage with the community that you are in, right? Are you practicing the human rights reductions or minimizations of human labor, right? That's actually what, the modern slavery aspect, the human right aspect of that, right? Moving on to the governance aspect, are your company governed well enough? For example, there's no corruption or bribery cases happens. Are you conduct your business in the ethical manner? Are you protecting your data from the customers as well as your internal? So those are some of the aspects of the E, the S, and the G. Now, I have the liberty and chance, together with my team, to talk to a lot of organizations, right? Be it government agencies as well as the public listed companies across the region in Southeast Asia. Now I realize there's a pattern that I would like to share with everyone. First is I recognize that it's a very uneven field. The reason I say uneven is that there are organizations that are very ready, right? For example, if I use a public listed company, a PLC as an example, the ones that inside the index, right, with different exchanges, the top 50 or top 30 of in the country, they'll be generally be ready, right? They have the resource, they have the investment to get done ready. But you also observe that the rest, possibly the other 90 over percent, right, that is actually not ready. And a lot are even unprepared. Some actually share with me that they try to pressure the exchanges to back down on reporting this enhanced mandatory reporting, which I think is not going to happen, right? So, which means that enhanced mandatory reporting standards is going to be stay and it will be kickstarting this year. So it's more on really how do you comply, right? Next is uh, some, not all, of the people who is responsible for sustainability reporting uh, is confused about the needs and standards. And I couldn't really blame them because things are really confusing. Which standards do you need to comply? What are the needs there? If you are listed companies, you may have to comply to your exchanges needs in sustainability reporting. And if you are not, then there are also other standards, right? For example, you have the GRI, you have the ISP, you have the TCFD, and of course, TCFD would be implant into some of the private listed companies in due time, in a few years' time. So that's why they are confusing on what's need to be done and what's need to be complied with. So the confusions are still there. And the next that I observe is I call it stuck at defining. What do I mean by stuck at defining? Stuck at defining simply means that, okay, now I know that I'm a listed company in this exchange. This is what I need to track as a list, right? And this is the indicators. And now you have to decipher down on how to measure each one of that and where can I find the information. And that's a very, very tedious process. And what we are talking about is like doing a stock take. You are not able to see the number one, the big picture. Number two is you are not looking at how do you improve because you don't know where you are at this point in time, right? And of course, the biggest issue is we've seen that there are lack of experienced talent. Right now, the agenda of sustainability or ESG is at the board level or even C level. And there are some organizations that have embarked on the journey of getting a head of sustainability or chief sustainability officer in place in their organization. But I do see that there are a lot of others, they are double heading, right? For example, they are running operations. They have been given this new task on sustainability reporting and managing sustainability aspect in the organization, or they are investor relations that they are given this new responsibility. So that's the kind of challenges that I see, right? However, as I share at the start of these slides, it is coming, right? And there's nowhere to turn back, and it's urgent. In a few months' time, you need to really submitting a report based on facts, based on data, right? So large scale actions will be needed, and it's for you to make a decision to get started. Now, how do you get started, or where do you get started? Number one is that you need to really identify what kind of standards or framework that you are obliged to do or you want to do, right? So number one, if you are public companies, likelihood it will be the individuals exchanges. And also you need to look at TCFD, right? Because a lot of exchanges has announced that in certain years, for example, in Pusat Malaysia is 2025 that you need to adopt TCFD standards. And you also need to also embark on a journey of the new standards or framework called ISP, which is adopted by all G7 and now cascade down to everyone. If you are public organizations, a non-for-profit or a government agencies, typically we see that you need to start with GRI, and a lot of them are now moving into ISP as well, though ISP is very, very new, just a few months old, right? Now you also need to depends on your industry needs. If you are a trading company, it will be different from a property company. It will be different from an IT company on what do you need to track. And also how your organizations are being structured. For example, everyone that is big enough, for example, public companies or government agencies, you are typically have different subsidiaries, different organizations together. So if I'm a company A, I have 5 subsidiaries, all of them are 100% owned, then you need to define this relationship. Or the other company is associate and it's 40% owned. So you need to define that relationship. Now, then it comes to the indicators. So each of the standards industry will comes in on different indicators that you need to prepare. Some are mandatory, some are optional. And of course, optional one will allow the other stakeholders, for example, ESG raters like MSCI or S&P, to be able to now know you better and able to give you a more effective ranking. Right. So that's where the indicators will sit. It's all depending on this framework or standards that you need to comply in industry. Now, that's where the challenges of data would start. Where is this data going to rise upon in your organization, right? So from an environmental perspective, emissions, water, and others, are there the responsibility of the person that looking at facility management or building management, manufacturing, or in fact HR, right? So each one of the organizations that we have spoken to are impacting this responsibility in the different departments. Social as well, right? So is that belongs to a corporate office under the MD office, or is that the board responsibility, or it is a supply chain department's problem, right? And the last one will be governance. From the aspect of business ethics, corruptions, likelihood, it will be HR, corporate office, or board. But when you talk about data privacy, data security, that's IT, typically an IT operations team that are able to deal with. And last but not least, of course, it could be the supply chain or purchasing departments that handle some of this aspect, right? Especially the downstream supply. So now, once you identify who are responsible, there will be the next layer will be able to now know where are the potential sources of data that you are able to get to produce this, to calculate and to produce these reports, right? And when I spoke to very senior people, for example, people that sit in the boards as well as the CEO, in their mind, they always think of their organizations as a very ideal world. So they always think that things are automated in their organizations. Everything is automated, right? Including that they'll have system and sensors and they'll capture data automatically. And so there'll be very less human intervention that's needed from data collection standpoint. However, I think in the real world, that what I have interacted with, a lot are really depending on the IT maturity in the organizations. And I'm not surprised to claim that more than 50% of the sources of data are being tracked manually using Excel, right? And I can even take the number higher, like for example, 70%, 80%, really depending on the IT maturity of each organization. Some of the data, since I think we are talking about organizations that need to perform sustainability reporting, some of this data would be residing in a system, right, rather than Excel. For example, if there are organizations that has an ERP, has a finance system, has a supply chain system, these are the good sources of data that you doesn't need to key in, right? You can actually extract the raw data, perform the mapping, and you can schedule a periodic extractions like daily or weekly, and then schedule the data picked up to a system and perform the necessary data cleansing as well as preparation of data so that the format is according to what's needed, and go to the next step of calculations as well as estimations and predictions, right? So we do see that some of the more advanced organizations has actually implemented sensors. That's well and good. Sensors would be the more accurate way of tracking a number of indicators. For example, carbon emissions, you can use sensors to track, you can water, waste. So these are some of the indicators in likely the environmental part that you can use sensors to track. The what I want to point out is that even though you have the sensors to track, the potential complexity lies on how your sensors are being implemented. So, for example, let's say you have 5 factories, and each of the factories which is in different places, you have 100 sensors to track different aspect in the E, the S, and the G, or likely to be the E, right? So in this case, the sensors, how are you implementing it? Are we saying that each of the sensors would send individual signals to a system, or we are talking about every single factories you have IoT gateway where you centralize, and there will be just one single source uh, from a particular location, like for example the factory, or you are more advanced, you have actually centralized everything into one IoT sensor, which means 500 sensors all centralized into one, and the system you can just pick up from that particular IoT gateway. So that will be the more seamless way to implement such a capabilities. So it's all depending on how sensors are being implemented from, so that you will aid the sustainability reporting and data collections aspect. So the other questions that I always being asked together with my team is, how about certain data that you are not tracked manually by sensors in system, or you're not able to track? So how is that able to works? So net is going back to if you have attended my last webinar. This is very similar to accounting standards in about 100 years ago, right? So during that time, everything is new from accounting standpoint. There are things that are not being tracked by the accountants. We just need to start somewhere, and of course, we have to disclaim that these are the parts that is really from raw data. This is the parts that actually estimated, right? So as long as your estimation is according to industry standards, a standard practice, and that should be okay. So I have a sad story to tell, right? Whatever that I'm talking so far is only getting to the first step. You are now identifying the indicators, who is responsible, where are the data, how do you bring this data into a data hub so that you have a sustainability data hub that you can do your work. That will include cleansing of your data, doing the calculations, the predictions, the estimations. That's unfortunately is the first step. You can imagine that you are handing in an exam paper, right? So you are finishing your exam, you're handing in your exam paper. That's exactly the same analogy that I try to paint. Right now, at this point, you don't know whether you are doing well in your exam, right? Because for some of the public listed companies, you are going to be ranked or rated by the ESG raters. So for those who is listed in Bursa Malaysia, for example, London Stock Exchange will give you a score in FTSE for Good, right? So that's one kind of scoring, right? You also have other ESG raters in Dow Jones and others, right? So you need to not just submitting your exam paper, though that's an important steps, but you need to do well, right? So in order to do well, you need to know where are the areas that you need to improve, and can you set goals? Right now you are getting 75 in your exam, for example, right? Can you set goal to say that in the next score, in the next exam, I need to get to, for example, 80, and which subjects in the exams analogy that you need to do more. For example, you score very well in SNG, in E you need to back up, right? So you need to do that. And the last question is very important. Now you identify the area, for example, the E that you need to back up. How would you improve your E? So you need some suggestions, right? So before I reach there, that AI could be a way to help you. Now, I also want to decipher certain myth, right? And it is also granted that there are complexities in collecting the data and also perform actual calculations. I'll come to that in a short while. That's the E, right? There's a straightforward calculations for SNG. So I'll give you one examples. In one of the indicators under Bursa Malaysia Enhanced Mandatory Reporting is the percentage of employee who completed the anti-corruption training. So if you have the people who has attended the training, your employee, right, and you'll be able to have this metrics done. So very straightforward calculation. You'll be coming up with a percentage, right, and that's one score is finished. So that's very straightforward calculation. Though you still need to calculate. The difficulties lies on the complexity of, for example, the scope 1, 2, 3, which I'll come into that in a short while. There are a lot of hardship on people calculating that and collecting the data that's needed, right? So I'll use the next slides to illustrate the kind of potential difficulties that you face. So when we talk about sustainability, inherently you can't run away with the scope 1, 2, 3 discussion. So scope 1 through 3 is defined as GHG, right? Greenhouse gas protocol of scope 1, 2, and 3. So scope 1 is what's the direct emission from your organizations, right? And I'll now decipher some of this myth. You will be able to cover, for example, the company's vehicles that belongs to companies again, right? Because it's let's not link that with something in scope 3, which is employee commute, right? If you have a company car that belongs to the companies, then of course it's all back under this company vehicle, or your van or your lorry. So that's the mobility combustion part that we need to track. And also there's, for example, fugitive combustion for scope 1. In that, you need to track, for example, the likes of the aircons, the refrigerators and so forth, right? That's in your company facilities, and of course, other manufacturing activities and so forth. So that's scope 1, right? It is hard, but not too hard because it's controllable. Now, scope 2 is tentatively one of the easiest one in this part of the world because there's no heating, there's no cooling aspect most of the time, unless you are really a manufacturing company. In this case, most of us only need to track the electricity and multiply it by a emission factor, the EF or the CC, that actually the carbon numbers that actually come out from your the utility companies that you're subscribing, purchasing your electricity. In this case, in Malaysia, for example, it will be TMB, right? What's a lot of people is having headache right now is the so-called indirect emission, the scope 3. Scope 3 itself has 15 categories, right? So I'm not going to run through all 15 categories. That includes your franchise, that includes your transportation and distributions, your suppliers, data. How do you get your suppliers data? So that will be one of the biggest challenge, right? The waste, the business travel, and as I pointed out earlier, even your employee travel to work will need to be also factored in as scope 3, right? So it's a very encompassing exercise if you want to really capture full of scope 3, right? So that's is the so-called common indicators that's needed to submit, right? In certain sectors, you have others in a way sector-specific indicators that you need to comply with. For example, for the organizations that in constructions, energy, plantations, properties, utilities, you need to also cater for example, biodiversity indicators, right? And for oil palm crop related companies, the palm oil companies, you need to cater for data points like percentage of certified palm oil, for example, right? So it's important to know that where you need to get these data points and how do you compile it. And though I think for sectorial indicators, so far it is a voluntary submission, right, rather than a mandatory submissions. Just to point this out. Now, you know where you are at. For example, going back to the exam papers concept, right? Where are you heading next? You need to, number one, set goals, right? You need some recommendations on your goal and timeline, perhaps. And of course, you need to track and monitor your progress so that your stakeholders, for example, the investors or the regulators, would be able to now know where you are, and you are really doing what you are telling the markets that you are doing, right? So very importantly, I think to a lot of senior management team as well as board members, they would like to have a discussions on ESG through a dashboards, right? So that's a important needs. They want to break down the performance of the E, the S, and the G, and they want to look at what are the improvements that is needed for each of these aspects. And sometimes they may want to drill down to the departmental contributions of each of the E, S, and G, assuming that the data that's coming into a system has that cater, right? Next off is, of course, this is to drive the management actions, but more so, nowadays there are a lot of organizations that tag certain percentage of the senior management compensation with ESG. If the ESG performance is good, their compensation will be going up, and vice versa. So they will need to know where they are, so that of course it will not impact the compensation in many ways. So I'll come to the compensation aspect and how this ESG goals and actions cascade down to all other stakeholders, for example, employee, when I'm closing the end of my slides, right? So in AI, organizations like yourself will be able to now have a better view on data collections as well as ensuring data qualities. And you'll be able to identify the trends and patterns and risks through a summarization of generative AI, right? Which is a very hot topic. And next off, very importantly, you need a lot of recommendations on the performance and the improvement. And of course, AI will be able to help you in sustainability planning. In a nutshell, AI should be embedded in your sustainability practice in your organizations. Now you start collecting data, you have reports. Now you want to improve, you want to track. So the whole process, AI can be enabler, right? And from an analysis and risk and opportunity standpoint, there are also other aspects that based on TCFD framework that you need to be aware of. For example, you need recommendations on the risks or policies and legal that potentially external data would be needed to fit in. You also want to track on resource efficient opportunity, for example. So the risk and opportunity side, you need to weight it, and that's all according to the TCFD framework. And as part of AI, these are able to provision to you, right? Some high level sharing on the system, right? You can actually do, for example, simulations. If you want to run the simulations through a certain indicators, you can do that, and you show you the results of the simulation. You can also look at the risk and opportunity presence on the different risks and different opportunities. Now, that's pertaining to your organizations. What if you are going out from organizations, and how AI is able to help in general us as a human being on sustainability? So there are a different aspect. According to BCG, right, we can actually deploy AI from a mitigation standpoint, from adaptation and resilience standpoint, and in fact, from a fundamental standpoint. And from fundamental standpoint, that's very important, right? A lot of items that I share in this very busy slides are actually big actions. Big actions mean I need to change my energy source, right? I need to have removal of certain environmental aspect. So there's a big actions, big investment. However, there's something that need to start from the stakeholders. So therefore, from a fundamental perspective, how can we encourage the climate positive behavior for the stakeholders like employees is very important. So AI will be able to nudge, to recommend, and to reward the employee to do things that are beneficial for you as organizations on the aspect of sustainability. Right. Again, going beyond on our organizations, right? AI can definitely do a lot of works in terms of climate change, water, oceans, clean air, and so forth. I just give you one example to deep dive, right? AI for climate change. AI for climate change, there will be different aspects like forecasting or optimizing the energy systems, right? And also doing urban planning, the smart building designs and so forth. And if you are talking about land use, AI will be able to do early crop yield prediction, for example, and so on and so forth that is being spelled out in the slides right now. Why I would like to share these slides is that at the core, um, the company that I work for, KewMan's, is actually an AI and data companies that venture down into sustainability. We do help organizations to bring in data, build a data hub on sustainability, and work through the process of using AI and data to embark on the journey that I've shared early on. But if there are also other opportunities to partner any one of you here on the journey of using AI for climate change, feel free to reach out to us so that we can have a deeper engagement that how AI and data can help different aspects in climate change. Uh, on the broader goals, and if you are really working on sustainability, this thing is not a stranger to you. The United Nations SDG, which is the Sustainability Development Goals, there's 17 of them. There's a research done by Binuaza, right, that work on the 17 SDG goals and look at the positive impact of AI. In a nutshell, in most of the aspect, AI really have a very positive impacts to everyone here, and therefore there's no doubt that AI, with the help of relevant and sufficient data, that we can actually change life for better in terms of sustainability standpoint. Now, this is something that I have actually preempted early on. Uh, the big idea is yes, you have a compliance goal to meet, and you want to actually do good for your for the whole economy, for the whole environment per se. However, all this starts by the stakeholders like employees. And there's another aspect that I would like to share as well, which I think if your top management has a goal tied to their compensations that will link to ESG or how ESG perform in the organizations, that goal would likely to be cascade down. So how do you effectively track every single employees beside their normal economical contribution? For example, if they are doing the works properly, that's well and good. That's really what they are hired for. But they also have a goal on and get doing good in terms of the E, the S, and the G, right? So therefore, tracking the actions, gamify them as such that the AI can be used to nudge, to recommend, and to reward them contextually. And you can see here there's a very simple ESG score. That score you can compare, you can contrast as a company-wide goal, and therefore you can actually have adjusted compensation for people who really care about sustainability in your organization. Right. Now, as a summary, AI and data are fundamental in achieving sustainability goal. Hopefully, for the last 35 minutes or so, that I'll able to convince you that the really fundamental step is where are the data that you track this and how can we enhance that practice in sustainability using AI. Applying the right AI methods, for example, generative AI to summarize for the busy executives, as well as recommendation for the operation people, so that they will be able to help in getting and validating the data, improving the sustainability planning and performance, right? And last but not least, very importantly, uh, use AI and behavioral science to look at how we embark on the journey together with your stakeholders like employee, to nudge them, to recommend them, to reward them, to perform the right sustainability actions. I think that's all for today. I'll pass the floor back to Macy. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Yling, for delivering such a thought-provoking presentation. So I'm sure all our audience found invaluable insights from your sharing and had a greater understanding on how data and AI could can truly unlock the power to optimize the sustainability practices. So next, we will have our panel session. So we'll have Ling with us again to address questions that we have collected offline from some of the participants and the customers. So if you have any questions, feel free to post your questions on the chat beside the presentation screen. So we will address all the questions that we have collected offline first before taking on the floor. So if we have enough time. So let's get started, Yoling.
Yep.
Okay, so the first question we have here is a very straightforward question. What are the data collection methods?
Okay. Thanks for the questions. I think it's a very relevant question because that's come to us quite a fair bit. From our system perspective, QSustain can take in three types of data collections methods. The first one is very straightforward, and I think it represents more than 50% of how the public sector companies and government agencies told us. It's actually the manual way using the Excel template that we have provided as part of the system. Because a lot of data are actually not in the system anyway, so there will be human collaborator within the organizations that need to do that. The second one is getting closer to automation. Data is being collected from a system like ERP, HR, and so forth. So the automations can happen to have a periodic download of this data. Uh, and from our system perspective, we'll pick it up in a periodic fashions and then ingest it into the platform itself. The third way is I would call it fully automation. That's really getting from sensors, though. Those are currently more applicable to the environmental indicators like waste, carbon emissions, and water, and so forth. Yeah. So in a nutshell, there are three methods to collect the data.
Okay, thanks, Ling. So I think this will be quite important because data collection is like a very important starting point if you want to go through the sustainability practices. So another questions here would be how do you ensure that the results that you produce in the report and dashboards are trusted?
Yeah. Again, this is a pretty important questions to everyone that needs to go into sustainability reporting. The reason is that we need to trust the results and, of course, trust the data that produce the results. So there are a number of guidelines or rather the practices that we actually implemented through the system. Number one is that we would get the raw data as raw as possible, ideally from a system or from the records itself, rather than now you need to input the final indicators and you give a number. And how this number will come about, nobody knows, right? So we would need to get from raw data. And from raw data perspective, obviously, we need to go through data quality checks to ensure that the data is of high quality. And if that's not happening, then of course the system can now go back to the source for the human collaborator to correct that and get the new data being sent in no matter which data collection methods that they are using. And now when the system is in the data hub, the next thing obviously is to ensure that it goes through the industry practice on calculating based on the right formulas. For example, for carbon emissions, we will follow the GHG protocols, right? How the different type of gases would have produced a different type of emission factors and so forth. So those are the right way to calculate based on industry practice so that again the results can be trusted. And the whole platforms are now hosted in AWS and is governed by AWS, one of the most prominent cloud service provider that provide the kind of data securities and cyber securities that everyone should trust. So therefore, those are the different measures that we actually implemented so that we can actually ensure the data and the results that produced by the data is trusted.
Okay, thanks, Ling, for the clear explanation, right? Because it's very important to know that what we're producing is actually trusted and also accurate. Yep. So the third questions that we have here is about the AI recommendation for for sustainability. So this participants would like to know more on this AI recommendation. Could you share more about this?
Sure. So from AI recommendation standpoint, since the whole sustainability practice are pretty much at the infancy, things will be evolved. But I think at the start, what we are trying to help the users is number one, use AI recommendation to number one, understand where you are, right? So using, for example, the generative AI, human understandable languages to allow the users, in this case, the accessibility managers, head of accessibility, or even the bots, to know where they are and where the pointers where are the areas that they will need help with. The next is obviously know what to do, how to improve. So from what to do and how to improve perspective, right now is following standard practice, standard guidelines. As the use case are getting more and more, and we are going into different industries, and when it becomes a more matured field, we do believe that the kind of recommendations at the later stage of this process would be much more. Right now, we do provide recommendations based on, for example, what they should do. For example, certain indicators are needing to improve, for example. So those are how we get the companies to get started on their journey.
Okay, thanks, Yulin, for sharing. So, I've received questions privately from the customers, from the participants. Sorry. So, the participant is interested to know more on the human aspect of sustainability that you have shared during the end of the session of your presentation. So, could Yulin elaborate more on that part?
Thanks. Thanks for the questions, and I think it is pretty timely as well. Because from sustainability standpoint, a lot are looking at big scale action, and obviously big scale actions are needed. For example, you need to install sensors to track. You need to have carbon storage mechanism and so forth. So those are well and good, right? Big actions, big investment. However, I think taking a step back internally within the organizations, the human aspect of sustainability need to start from everyone. So everyone simply means the core would be the employee, right? So if you are public companies or you are government agencies, let's start with the employee. Since you as a senior management, likelihood you will attach X percentage of your compensation stack to ESG or sustainability, then how do you cascade that down to your employee, right? So the best way to do it is that let's align that with the actions, right? The actions will be, for example, an app that able to gamify the actions, not just pertaining to the E. I think a lot of applications right now that not pertaining to any organizations and stuff like that, that would just track, for example, oh, I'm actually doing something good for the environment. Basically, I'm cycling to work, I take public transport and so forth. So those are well and good. But over and above this, I think there are more things that in the organizations we can encourage the employee to do. For example, reports abnormal situations that against the governance, against the certain practice that the S and the G and of course the E that the company has set up to do. Attend more training and participate in social events that the organizations are organizing, right? So in this case, based on all these actions in the E, the S, and the G, they will be, for example, accumulating certain points, and these actions will then inherently able to allow the internal AI to nudge, to recommend, and to reward the employee or any other stakeholders in the way that they are doing things. So I keep coming back to the word stakeholder is that while the starting point is obviously from a employee standpoint, I don't see there's any reason that why we couldn't extend this to the employee, to the customers or even to the citizens, right? So in this case, it will be a very broad-based movement that not just about getting everybody to be aware of sustainability, but also to encourage the actions towards a better life in the future to be more sustainable. So that's the purpose of this particular social app.
Okay, thanks Yoling for sharing. So our time is almost reaching the end. So I think once again thank you Yoling for your time, for the insightful presentation and also your sharing during this panel session. So hope all this will help our audiences today to gain some helpful insights. So thanks for the participants who posted some questions to us privately. So we will address your question through email after the webinar. So do interact with us if you have more questions or any thoughts that you would like to discuss through the emails with our expert. So thank you for joining us today, everyone. We appreciate your time in staying with us until the end of the webinar. So we hope that you found this session informative. So hope to see you again and have a nice day. Thank you. Bye.